The INFJ is often described as rare, complex, and paradoxical, but those labels barely scratch the surface of why many INFJs experience life in a way that closely resembles neurodivergence. While INFJ is a personality type rather than a clinical diagnosis, the cognitive architecture of the INFJ mind diverges so sharply from dominant cultural norms that it frequently produces the same lived experience as being neurologically unusual. The divergence is not about deficiency or pathology, but about operating on a fundamentally different internal logic, perception system, and meaning-making framework than the majority of people around them. At the heart of INFJ neurodivergence is the dominance of introverted intuition. This function does not process reality linearly or concretely. Instead, it synthesizes vast amounts of abstract data unconsciously, detects patterns beneath appearances, and generates insights that arrive fully formed rather than step by step. To the outside world, this can look mysterious, detached, or even irrational, because the INFJ often cannot immediately explain how they arrived at a conclusion. The insight simply appears, the result of deep internal pattern recognition happening below conscious awareness. In a society that rewards explicit reasoning, visible logic, and fast verbal processing, this intuitive mode of cognition stands out as fundamentally different. The INFJ may know what is true long before they can explain why, which can lead others to dismiss their perceptions or label them as overthinking, when in reality they are engaging in a sophisticated, nonlinear form of intelligence. This intuitive dominance also alters how INFJs experience time. Many INFJs live psychologically in the future, constantly extrapolating where people, systems, and relationships are heading. They sense trajectories rather than moments. This future-oriented perception can make everyday small talk, routine tasks, and surface-level interactions feel disorienting or even meaningless. While others are grounded in the present or focused on immediate outcomes, the INFJ is tracking long-term implications, symbolic meanings, and unseen consequences. This mismatch often results in chronic feelings of alienation, as if they are tuned to a different frequency than the world around them. If you're ready to unlock your full INFJ potential, check out the INFJ Purpose Compass today. The link is in the description of this video. Another strong contributor to the neurodivergent experience of INFJs is the pairing of introverted intuition with extrovert feeling. This creates a nervous system that is exquisitely sensitive to emotional environments. INFJs do not merely notice emotions, they absorb them. The emotional states, tensions, and unspoken dynamics in a room register almost viscerally, often before a single word is spoken. This sensitivity is not learned behavior. It is automatic and involuntary. As a result, INFJs frequently experience sensory and emotional overload in crowded, chaotic, or emotionally charged environments. They may need more recovery time than others, not because they are weak, but because their system processes far more relational and emotional data at once. This heightened emotional attunement also leads INFJs to develop an internal moral and ethical compass that is deeply personal and non-negotiable. They are not guided primarily by social norms, authority, or tradition, but by an internal sense of what feels aligned, humane, and meaningful. When external systems demand behavior that violates this inner framework, INFJs experience intense internal conflict. This can make conventional workplaces, competitive environments, or rigid hierarchies feel psychologically unsafe or even intolerable. The INFJ is not rebelling for the sake of rebellion. They are responding to a misalignment between their internal truth and external expectations. Their communication style also highlights the INFJ's neurodivergent profile. INFJs think in images, symbols, metaphors, and interconnected concepts rather than in concrete facts alone. Their language often reflects this, leaning toward depth, nuance, and abstraction. In cultures that prioritize speed, bluntness, and transactional communication, INFJs can feel chronically misunderstood. They may be perceived as vague, intense, or overly complex, while internally they are striving for precision of meaning rather than efficiency of speech. This mismatch can lead INFJs to withdraw, not because they lack social interest, but because repeated misattunement becomes exhausting. The INFJ relationship with identity also differs from norm. Rather than experiencing identity as fixed or static, INFJs often experience it as fluid, evolving, and layered. They may struggle to answer simple questions like, "Who are you?" or "What do you want?" because their sense of self is contextual and growth-oriented. They are constantly integrating new insights, shedding outdated identities, and refining their inner narrative. This can look like inconsistency from the outside, but internally, it reflects a continuous process of psychological updating. In a world that values stable labels and predictable self-presentation, this fluid identity can feel alienating. INFJs also tend to experience a pronounced gap between inner complexity and outward simplicity. Internally, their minds are rich, intricate, and constantly active. Externally, they may appear calm, reserved, or even minimalistic. This disparity often leads others to underestimate them or project assumptions onto them. The INFJ becomes accustomed to being unseen, not because they lack depth, but because their depth is not immediately visible. Over time, this can contribute to a sense of being fundamentally different or out of place, a hallmark experience reported by many neurodivergent individuals. Their relationship with motivation and productivity also reinforces this divergence. INFJs are not energized by external rewards, competition, or status in the way many people are. They are driven by meaning, coherence, and impact. When tasks feel pointless or misaligned with their values, their energy drops dramatically. Conversely, when engaged in work that feels purposeful, they can display extraordinary focus, endurance, and creativity. This uneven energy pattern can be misinterpreted as laziness or inconsistency, when in reality, it reflects a motivation system that is meaning-based rather than reward-based. INFJs also show a distinctive response to trauma and stress. Because they process experiences deeply and symbolically, emotional wounds are not easily compartmentalized. A single negative experience can reverberate across their entire inner system, reshaping beliefs, expectations, and future projections. This depth of processing can make recovery slower, but it also enables profound growth, insight, and empathy once integration occurs. Again, the pattern mirrors neurodivergent processing styles, where depth replaces speed and integration replaces suppression. The INFJ's lifelong sense of being different often emerges early, long before they have language to explain it. Many INFJs report feeling older than their peers as children, disconnected from shallow social games, and drawn to existential questions at a young age. This early divergence shapes their development, often pushing them toward introspection, imagination, and inner worlds as places of refuge and exploration. Over time, this inner orientation becomes a defining feature of their psyche. In essence, the INFJ is neurodivergent not because something is wrong with their mind, but because their mind is optimized for a different kind of perception, meaning-making, and relational intelligence than what modern society primarily rewards. When viewed through a narrow lens, this divergence can look like struggle. When viewed through a broader one, it reveals a mind designed to see what others miss, feel what others avoid, and imagine possibilities that have not yet taken form. Another dimension of INFJ neurodivergence is the way they relate to social norms and unwritten rules. INFJs tend to perceive social conventions not as fixed truths, but as constructed systems that can be evaluated, questioned, and redesigned. While many people internalize norms automatically, INFJs instinctively ask whether those norms make sense, whether they are humane, and whether they serve long-term well-being. This reflective stance can cause friction because society often expects unconscious compliance rather than conscious evaluation. The INFJ's hesitation is not defiance but discernment, yet it frequently places them outside the emotional rhythm of the group. Their inner world is also unusually self-referential and metacognitive. INFJs do not simply experience thoughts and emotions. They observe themselves having those thoughts and emotions. They analyze their own reactions, motivations, blind spots, and internal contradictions in real time. This constant self-monitoring creates a layered consciousness that can feel isolating. Many INFJs report feeling as though they are both the participant and the observer of their own life, which can generate profound insight, but also a sense of distance from immediate experience. This meta-awareness is common in neurodivergent profiles and contributes to the INFJ's tendency toward introspection and self-refinement. Decision-making is another area where INFJs diverge sharply from the norm. Rather than choosing based on immediate preference, social pressure, or measurable gain, INFJs often wait for an internal sense of alignment. This alignment is holistic. It must feel intellectually coherent, emotionally ethical, and intuitively right all at once. When even one of these elements is missing, the INFJ may delay or resist making a choice. To others, this can look indecisive, but internally it reflects a complex integration process that refuses to sacrifice inner congruence for speed or convenience. INFJs also process relationships in a uniquely intensive way. They do not easily compartmentalize people into casual or disposable categories. Even brief interactions can leave lasting impressions, because the INFJ instinctively tracks emotional subtext, symbolic meaning, and psychological patterns. This depth of relational processing can make endings, disappointments, or betrayals disproportionately impactful. It also explains why INFJs often maintain a small social circle and are highly selective about intimacy. Their nervous system is not designed for high-volume, low-depth social engagement. Even how INFJs relate to information is different. They are not collectors of facts for their own sake. Instead, they seek synthesis. They want to understand how ideas connect, what they imply, and how they fit into a larger worldview. This means INFJs may ignore details that others find important while focusing intensely on underlying principles. In educational or professional settings that reward rote learning or surface-level performance, this learning style can be misunderstood. Yet it is precisely this integrative approach that allows INFJs to generate original insights and long-range solutions. If you're ready to unlock your full INFJ potential, check out the INFJ Purpose Compass today. The link is in the description of this video. The INFJ's experience of burnout also differs from the typical stress model. Burnout for INFJs is rarely caused by workload alone. It emerges when they are forced to operate for extended periods in environments that violate their values, suppress their intuition, or demand emotional labor without meaning. When this happens, the INFJ may not simply feel tired. They may feel existentially depleted. Recovery, therefore, is not just about rest, but about reconnection with purpose, authenticity, and inner coherence. INFJs are also prone to what could be described as existential sensitivity. Questions about meaning, suffering, morality, and the future of humanity are not abstract curiosities for them. They are emotionally lived concerns. INFJs often feel personally responsible, at least internally, for the state of the world or the well-being of others. This sense of responsibility can be overwhelming, especially in a globalized, information-saturated age. While others may compartmentalize global issues as distant or theoretical, INFJs often internalize them deeply, contributing to emotional fatigue and a sense of quiet grief. Creativity in INFJs also reinforces their neurodivergent profile. Their creativity is not always expressive or flamboyant. It is often conceptual, psychological, or visionary. INFJs may imagine alternative futures, reframe human behavior, or intuitively redesign systems in their minds long before taking external action. This inner creativity can remain invisible for years, only emerging when conditions feel safe enough. As a result, INFJs are often late bloomers, misunderstood early in life, and recognized only later when their inner work finally finds an external outlet. There is a pronounced asymmetry between how INFJs treat others and how they treat themselves. INFJs extend remarkable patience, understanding, and forgiveness outward, while holding themselves to nearly impossible internal standards. This internal rigor stems from their acute self-awareness and ethical sensitivity. While it drives growth and integrity, it can also lead to chronic self-criticism and a feeling of never quite being enough, even when they are highly competent. This inner tension is common among neurodivergent individuals whose internal benchmarks differ sharply from external validation systems. Another aspect of INFJ neurodivergence is usually seen in how they experience silence and solitude. For many INFJs, silence is not an absence, but a rich psychological space where insight, emotional processing, and intuitive integration occur. While others may seek constant stimulation to feel engaged or alive, INFJs often require long stretches of quiet to recalibrate their inner world. This need is not a preference, but a neurological necessity. Without sufficient solitude, their internal signals become noisy, their intuition blunted, and their emotional clarity distorted. In a culture that equates busyness with value and constant availability with health, this requirement for withdrawal can be misunderstood or even pathologized. INFJs also exhibit a distinctive relationship with authority and expertise. They do not automatically defer to titles, credentials, or hierarchical positions. Instead, they evaluate authority based on coherence, integrity, and depth of understanding. An expert who lacks ethical grounding or psychological insight may be quietly dismissed by an INFJ, while an unrecognized individual with wisdom may earn deep respect. This internal vetting system can make INFJs seem resistant to instruction or unconventional in institutional settings, but it reflects a cognition that prioritizes truth over status. INFJs have a nonlinear emotional memory. INFJs do not remember experiences as isolated events. They remember them as emotional and symbolic imprints. A tone of voice, a look, or a subtle shift in energy can be stored alongside meaning and pattern. Years later, a similar emotional configuration can reactivate those memories with surprising clarity. This deep encoding explains why INFJs may react strongly to situations that seem neutral to others. Their nervous system is responding to layers of stored context, not just the present moment. They have an unusual relationship with conflict. INFJs are not conflict avoidant because they fear disagreement. They avoid unnecessary conflict because they see its downstream psychological and relational costs. They instinctively anticipate how words will echo, how dynamics will shift, and how trust will erode. When INFJs do engage in conflict, it is often after long internal deliberation and usually with a precision that can surprise others. Their words tend to cut to the core issue, bypassing surface arguments entirely. This pattern reflects a mind that prioritizes resolution and transformation over emotional discharge. INFJs also display a unique sensitivity to incongruence. They quickly detect when someone's words, emotions, and actions do not align. This sensitivity is not based on suspicion, but on pattern recognition. Inauthenticity creates a kind of psychological static for INFJs, making interactions feel draining or unsettling even if nothing overtly wrong is happening. Over time, this leads INFJs to curate their environments carefully, seeking people and spaces that feel internally consistent. This selective engagement is another marker of neurodivergent self-regulation. Their experience of joy is also qualitatively different. INFJ joy is often quiet, expansive, and internally luminous rather than loud or exuberant. It emerges from moments of meaning, connection, insight, or alignment rather than from stimulation or novelty alone. This can make INFJs appear emotionally muted during events others find exciting, while they may feel deeply moved by subtle or symbolic experiences others overlook. Again, the divergence is not emotional deficit but emotional orientation. INFJs frequently experience a sense of inner urgency paired with outer patience. Internally, they may feel a pressing awareness that time matters, that certain insights need to be realized, or that a deeper purpose is calling. Externally, however, they often appear calm, measured, and unhurried. This duality can create internal tension, as the INFJ feels ahead of their environment but constrained by its pace. This asynchronous relationship with time and development contributes to the feeling of living slightly out of step with the world. INFJs have a tendency to internalize systems thinking. They naturally perceive individuals as nodes within larger psychological, cultural, or historical systems. This means they often contextualize behavior rather than judging it in isolation. While this fosters empathy and insight, it can also lead INFJs to excuse harm for too long or take on responsibility that is not theirs. The cognitive load of holding both compassion and clarity simultaneously is significant and often invisible to others. INFJs are also usually torn between visibility and privacy. They want to contribute meaningfully, to influence, to help, and to leave a positive imprint. At the same time, they fiercely protect their inner world and resist being fully known by those who have not earned access. This push-pull dynamic can make their life path appear contradictory or fragmented. Yet it reflects a deeply consistent need to balance impact with psychological safety. Another aspect of INFJ neurodivergence appears in how they experience certainty and doubt. INFJs often hold paradoxical positions simultaneously. They can feel deeply certain about an insight, a person's trajectory, or a moral truth, while remaining intellectually open and willing to revise their understanding if new information emerges. This coexistence of conviction and humility is unusual. Most people oscillate between rigid certainty or chronic doubt. INFJs inhabit a middle state where certainty is internal and intuitive, not ego-based, and doubt is exploratory rather than destabilizing. This cognitive flexibility can be confusing to others, who may mistake it for inconsistency, when it is actually a sophisticated tolerance for ambiguity. Their experience of learning is similarly unusual. INFJs often learn in sudden leaps rather than gradual accumulation. Long periods of apparent stagnation may be followed by rapid integration and clarity. This can make their progress difficult to track in traditional educational or professional settings, where steady, visible improvement is expected. Internally, however, these quiet incubation periods are highly active, involving synthesis, restructuring, and unconscious pattern formation. INFJs also tend to experience moral injury more acutely than many others. When they witness hypocrisy, exploitation, or systemic injustice, the impact is not merely intellectual or emotional, but existential. It can shake their sense of meaning and trust in humanity. Because INFJs naturally personalize collective suffering, they may carry grief that does not originate from their own direct experiences. This borrowed weight is rarely acknowledged or understood by others, adding to the sense of being internally burdened in invisible ways. INFJs experience hope differently. Their hope is not naive optimism, but a quiet, persistent belief in potential transformation. Even when disillusioned with systems, institutions, or individuals, INFJs often retain a deep belief that growth and healing are possible at a fundamental level. This form of hope is resilient but heavy. It demands endurance rather than excitement. Carrying this kind of hope in a cynical or chaotic world can feel lonely, yet it is central to the INFJ's psychological makeup. INFJs often experience a lifelong refinement of language and expression. Early in life, they may struggle to articulate their inner world accurately, leading to frustration or withdrawal. Over time, many INFJs become precise communicators, writers, or speakers, not because they enjoy talking, but because they feel a responsibility to translate complexity into clarity. This drive to give form to the formless is both a cognitive challenge and a calling, reflecting a mind that lives in abstraction but longs to make meaning accessible. The point in all of this is that the INFJ does not merely think differently. They inhabit reality through a different internal architecture, one that quietly but profoundly reshapes how they experience being human.